podcasting for learning and development, internal podcasting. So, hello and welcome. My name is Norma Jean Belenke. I'm the head of events here at Podbean, and I'm joined today by Shannon Martin, who's our director of communications and also a corporate podcast specialist. So, hello, Shannon. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, one of my favorite topics, so we'll have fun today.
Yes, internal podcasting. So let's get into it. First of all, what is internal podcasting? Because we all know what a podcast is, right? You're listening on a public directory. You're sharing links with friends. You're subscribing to shows. What does internal look like, and what are the differences?
Yeah, the thing that's interesting is it's basically a use of the medium in a different way. So the podcasts could be very similar in nature, the structure, what if you listen to one, it could kind of be internal, external, but they're focused to some kind of closed audience when you don't want the podcast to go out to the public. So your target audience is whether it be members or employees. I think today we're talking about learning and development, so that usually would be employees. So it's focused
Yeah.
internally, and therefore it's not put out on all the different podcast directories. It's secured in some way. We have a
Yes.
specific platform at Podbean that makes sure that it's delivered very conveniently and securely, so that people can still listen in an app, that we offer that has all the great features because we're podcast app people, so we know how those work, and we've spent a lot of time on developing those. So it provides a good user experience, but keeps them just going to the people that it's intended for. And so yes, they're used a lot for employees, and it has some of the same benefits as any kind of podcast, being able to learn and grow and stay connected on the go and easily, and have kind of knowledge right at your fingertips.
Absolutely. And I just really want to talk about the user experience really quickly because when we're talking about an internal podcast, like how does somebody listen to one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is really key. Our team was just at a conference, ATD, Association of Talent Development, where we've done a lot of speaking and writing and things. So we've just talked to a lot of people in this role of L&D.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have started doing podcasts, started recording them, and they love the idea and the medium. But a lot of them start out by putting it on an existing tool. So they have a learning management system, an LMS or an intranet. And quite a few people were talking to us about this exact point, that they felt that the podcasts were good, that they were developing, and that they had been asked actually to provide it in this manner in a podcast. And so they know there's a need and a desire, but by putting it on a system that wasn't made for podcasting, they were experiencing a lot of blocks for the users. So people have to have the multiple kind of login system, and they're not
Yeah.
made for playback of podcasts. So it didn't have a player where you could skip or rewind or pause or pick up listening again. If they were on a
Yeah.
walk, they couldn't listen, because if the screen kind of goes dark like it does, it shut it down. I actually heard this from someone months ago, that he was like, we want people to be able to listen in the gym, or take it. We have I think they actually had a company gym. We want them, and they can't really do it well with that system. So it's one of the factors of how you deliver an internal
Yeah.
podcast well. Obviously the content is probably the first consideration, and the user experience is going to be
Yes.
a key part of that as well. And that's kind of the missing link at a lot of companies right now, from what we hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And just making sure that that content is both secure and accessible. So, from the user standpoint, they're going to use an app with internal podcasting. They're going to use an app that's secure. So, it's a little bit different, right? Where it's not external, right? You're not broadcasting things out into the world. It's really internal. And so, the only people who have access to that content are those who explicitly are supposed to have access to that content within your organization. And that
Yes,
would be
definitely.
through, yeah, absolutely. And that would be through a secure app in general. So we have the Podbean Pro app here, which we can talk about later, which is fantastic. And or custom white label apps and stuff like that. So in general, within the field of learning and development, how are programs currently being implemented, and what issues do other solutions like an intranet maybe have that podcasting
Mhm.
solves?
Yeah, I think learning and development programs vary widely. A lot of training and that kind of
Mhm.
thing actually, takes place or took place in person. So, I have a day-long training that I go to. I have onboarding, these kind of things. And of course, a lot of that has gone virtual, not just because of the pandemic, but even before. Really kind of creative programs with different learning components. Companies are doing things around micro learning so that you have these chunks, small chunks of information
Mm,
when you need them and you learn different skills. They obviously work on leadership development. So these can be anything from an in-person events to virtual trainings, videos you go to on demand. I mean, there's quite a wide array of training and learning and development resources. And at this conference where we were, there's many learning management systems that help them track and put all this content out there. So that's been, what an L&D program, is. It's consists
yeah,
of a lot of
traditionally.
different
Yeah.
things. Yeah, and traditionally, and then also, they're moving into new technologies and they're using
Yeah.
VR and AR and all kinds of things. But I think
Wow.
where the sweet spot is for podcasting with that is that there are pieces of that. It doesn't Podcasting will not replace the whole learning and development program, but it's a piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
and to give people that accessibility, that sort of following along with that micro learning component, that access at their hands for new information, for what they need when they're going into a situation that day or dealing with something new, or they did maybe a big training in the past, but that was a month ago and now I'm dealing with the situation today. I need to go back and listen to something on that. I need to have it quick at my hands, something I can do. And so that's one piece of it. I think certain pieces of content also uniquely fit podcasts because listening can really get it into our brains in a way sometimes that other things can't. Obviously,
Yeah.
some things are visual, and you need video, which we also do video podcasts. But it may not every piece of training, necessarily if it's an audio podcast,
Yeah.
but there's a lot that can be done with it. And so we're seeing that the accessibility, the fact that people are working in different locations, remotely, at home, want to have some flexibility, and the fact that people have so much screen time that they're also asking for how can I get information without while giving my eyes a break sometimes. So that's
Yes,
another piece.
I think in the over the past 2 years, it's something
Yeah.
where, we've all really reached screen fatigue sooner or later. It does come and go, but that's such a big aspect of
Mhm.
how we work these days, right? So,
Yeah, definitely. And
oh,
time, I think between looking at the screen, but also, there are things that are nice to have, like interaction, a meeting, people
mhm,
kind of going back and forth. That makes sense. But there are just, again, other pieces of content that don't need
yeah,
that. And if people don't have to be at a specific time on their computer, then
yeah,
it frees them up a lot. So it adds a lot
yeah,
of flexibility. So it's really thinking about the employee's experience when delivering this and giving them, and I just talked to a company the other week and they have technicians on the road and they said, oh, we do a lot of video and even fact sheets, that walk them through a lot of very technical things, but they are driving to a client and they're working on XYZ product that maybe they
yeah,
haven't dealt with in a while. If they could quickly listen, they're in the vehicle. They at that point they need
yeah.
to just quickly listen and kind of go over the steps and remind them about how that particular technology or whatever it is works. So there's just a lot of places it can fit.
Absolutely. And I think we've all been there, right? Where sometimes that little refresh just helps bring back all of the knowledge that you actually know, right? In the moment, you know it, but it's something where I could see the application there. Absolutely, Shannon. And especially with sales and presentations and things like that, whether you're on the road or you're commuting now that people are starting to go back to the office, and
Mhm.
the application there is really valuable, especially because that travel time or in between time where you're maybe not looking at a screen or you're in transit
Mhm.
is really valuable. So I also want to go back a little bit because there's a lot to unpack. You really are
Mhm.
a corporate podcast specialist, and within micro learning, what are some trends that we've seen there with podcasting? Because I want to dive deeper a little bit there.
Yeah, I think two pieces of that. One is potentially segmenting content, and also the way if you're making podcasts, we have a lot of companies that make a lot of different content. Sometimes they repackage, they segment it. They also make sure to make it really clear so people can find it. So we always suggest, really clear titles and descriptions for the episodes. So this enables people to get this mini chunk of learning, that they need for their particular role. And so it may be, again, that they segment out certain podcasts to certain groups that really need it. They put together playlists. So maybe they take, they're doing podcasts on multiple things, and they take and pull a playlist together that someone can grab from for those certain things. So micro learning is just a short, very digestible piece of content, podcast or video, or a lot of people, I think of video for it because that's what's been used traditionally, but podcasts are they're a perfect fit for it, and they enable someone to get that piece of learning that really relates to a very specific thing that they need to kind of do at the time, and it's that kind of just-in-time nature of things. So I think that's an important piece of it. And then again, thinking about ways that they may take larger things of content and break it down. So we don't always think about, when creating a podcast, we might think, creating this new thing, but we might have something that's a larger podcast series, and then some pieces of that can be repurposed for micro learning. So it can really be, podcasts can also really be efficient, not only to consume, but for the L&D team to maximize their time and efficiency without having to, reinvent the wheel. So they can take those, we had this great series on whatever. Okay, that's great, but how do we continue to use that and, take pieces out of that, audio, and have it so someone can listen to just that part of that and really digest it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think digesting things is really kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying, and what we really talk about here at Podbean, right? You can absorb a certain amount of information, right? And then if it's a bite-sized chunk, you're going to remember it, right? You're going to retain that information better as well. I think that's so important when we're talking about how you want your audiences internally within your organization, your employees, to really incorporate and integrate a lot of that knowledge and learning as well. Because, if we're not integrating it, right? If the sponge of our brain isn't
Yeah.
absorbing things, right? It's something where, it can be really hard to have an impact as well. And I love what you also said about, breaking down some larger content, because if you have great content within your organization, but maybe it's something where, after 30 minutes, people just zone out. It's just too much, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And the thing with micro learning is it's, as you said, to absorb it, and then to be able to, it's kind of, the concept is to absorb something, small enough,
Yeah,
and and then to apply it kind of
yeah,
immediately. So that's exactly what podcasts are great for. That's there. It's on demand content. That's the thing, right? You do a training a while back, and
yeah,
if you don't apply it for a while, it's it can be difficult to really put it into practice properly. And then also, whether it's micro learning or larger things, the power of the storytelling within podcasts is really great for that
yes,
sponge that you mentioned. How do we sponge things up? Well, we sponge up stories. That's what our brain is
yeah.
geared towards as humans from the early days of humanity.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a statistic that I've heard you quote before about how we retain information through stories. So share that one again, Shannon. It's pretty valuable.
Yeah, so I need to come up with a story around this so that so that it's not ironic, but we're 20 times more likely to remember a fact as part of a story. So
Wow.
putting things in context instead of, those bullet points of a whole bunch of stats, it's unlikely we'll remember those. But yeah, 20 times more likely to remember a fact. So that's yeah, I have to spend some time coming up with a more creative story to give that fact
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's true. And we talk a lot about storytelling here at Podbean because publicly, we host over 600,000 podcasts. We're one of the top podcast hosting companies globally. And it's really story that makes your content memorable and brings that emotional experience to your listeners. So Absolutely. That's such a big aspect of it. And Shannon, you also touched on accessibility. So I'd love for you to expand a little bit about that before we move on.
Yeah, I think that podcasts, as we've discussed, there's an accessibility factor just in the fact that people can get them on demand and they can listen on the go. And it also
Yeah.
fits within a schedule and a day and different employee realities.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The other piece is that it's not dependent, if like our organization and many, we have people spread across the world.
Yeah.
And therefore, if someone says, you have to be at 9 a.m. Eastern at this meeting, it's great. It might be great for me and the team in New York, but it might be awful for, teams that are in Asia who have to, who it's the middle of the night
Yeah.
for. So it really enables you to also give an equalization in terms of those kind of things being delivered. And the other thing that we've seen that's been really exciting with accessibility is getting your internal experts involved. So everything is not just top down from the CEO or the leaders, or even from the L&D team. The L&D team can get different experts within the organization involved, and particularly organizations have really tried with their podcasts and succeeded from what we've seen to bring in different voices, so that this, we're not just hearing again from the VP of so and so.
Yeah.
We're hearing from different employee stories about their realities and what they do and their success stories and things that others can learn from and develop. And we're able to tap into that in a better way, because also doing a podcast interview, what we've seen is that is for many people a lot less it has an intimidation factor, but it's less intimidating typically than saying you're going to speak at this big event, or even video, even doing audio versus video. Sometimes the audio for people is less of an issue, more accessible. And so that's a way, in telling them it can be edited, we'll go through it, it can be edited, and prepping them. A lot of our L&D podcasts talk about how they do the prep, kind of the prep discussion and stuff like that. So it's been able to get more employee voices out there and tap into that expertise that they have, and the experiences that employees have, because it's such a wealth. The talent is such a wealth of a resource.
Yes, absolutely. And I think when we're speaking about employee success stories, like you touched on, right? Whether it's sales and there's a particular feature of the product that if you showcase it, in a specific way or in even a specific sequence, it can really help your clients understand your products better and, really help with a sales strategy. There's so many instances where sharing personal stories or success stories can help an entire team adopt tools and best practices really for sales
Yeah.
strategy.
For sure. I think it's really helpful, hearing what other people have done and been successful with, or even challenges. And then what's cool that we're seeing now, because talent development, learning and development is kind of
Yeah.
a range from recruiting and bringing people in and onboarding them, through developing them into their next role and giving them more skills and developing them into leaders. So they're at all of those places along the line, podcasts can really make sense. We've seen a lot of uses of onboarding. Now some of those very companies are taking that and saying, wow, we have this great
Yes.
collection of stories and we need to recruit people. Like, it's a big
Yeah.
issue right now. And how are we going to get people in? Wow, we could even
Yes.
take some of these internal podcasts and turn them, either give certain people access or even make some of them public. And that way people can really see what kind of organization this is, and want to join, because there's a lot of, you know, oh, we're great, we help you, we're a great organization, and talent has a lot of options now. But if they actually hear from employees about what really goes on in the organization, it can attract them. So that's another.
Absolutely. And hearing, what the company culture is like in a lot of ways, because for a lot of organizations, you don't know until you work there. So,
Yeah,
I think having that perspective and hearing those stories is so helpful and really also showcases some of the different experiences and work that people within your organization are doing because it's really the people that make up your organization.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's what that role, is all about, supporting people in their growth, and bringing the right people
Yeah,
in and having that culture fit. So there's so many different ways. And I think, again, the storytelling, but also just voice in of itself, hearing people's voices, it is personalized in a different way than you can read an article in the company newsletter about an employee story, and it doesn't feel quite the same as hearing that employee being interviewed, and hearing it straight from the person, or hearing from a leader about what they think about the direction of the company, or any of that kind of thing.
absolutely. And I think also, we've spoken about this as well at Podbean, how our voices really carry emotion, right? And so there's a vulnerability in the voice you can't really hide. It's not like you're on stage and you're putting on makeup, right? It's really something where your emotion or your tone is really going to come through. So that's also a really important aspect as well, and really kind of showcases the feeling that people have when they're working with an organization or when they're making a sale, right?
Right.
So it's
Exactly.
definitely something that really shares that emotional experience as well within your organization. So we've spoken about what some companies are doing, but I want to talk about what are some real companies that are using podcasting now,
Mhm.
and what are some applications that we can talk about today?
Sure, yeah, and I'll just note here before we start that, for anyone that's watching, the Podbean website, we have an enterprise page, and we can put the
Yeah,
links in the notes here. And there's a resources tab, and under that there are case studies, and we have a few of these up there. So we're always adding more. But a few of these that are in there that I'll note. One of our longtime clients that has been on some presentations with me, that has really done an amazing job with podcasts, is the company VMware technology company. And particularly, they are an organization that started with the sales training kind of need. That was specifically why they started doing podcasts, but they've done numerous types of podcasts over the years.
yeah,
One of the ones that they had this ongoing sales training series, and they
hmm,
take and then also use it for onboarding. So that's kind of
yeah,
a long-term ongoing piece that's been really helpful for them. But they also, during the pandemic, they made one, I think it was called Remote Selling, and it was to address that pandemic need. So the big change all of a
yeah,
sudden that the salespeople were faced with: how do we do this? How do we do this
yeah,
well? We need information right now. Because they already had Podbean and they already made podcasts, that's what's nice about the very flexibility of creating and getting podcasts out there. They could quickly jump on that,
yeah,
create this podcast, get it out there. I mean, it wasn't something where, oh, that's great, but people needed it now. So they couldn't
yeah,
they had to go into the process and 4 or 5 months from now I'll get it out. They needed it right away. So they had that nimbleness, with having podcasts already in the organization to do that. And that was a series that isn't going on now because the need is things have changed, for how things are going on. But they did that, and then they also they had an expert in house who used to do
wow,
a sort of lengthy process of, I believe they were put out as sort of technical white papers. So it cost the organization a lot of
yeah,
money and time because they did a process of writing and hiring technical editors and all of this kind of stuff and putting it out there.
yeah,
And so he started doing them as podcasts. And from what I have understood from VMware, so it became sort of his full-time job. He
yeah,
really enjoyed it. The end users liked it a lot better, than
yeah,
reading these extensive white papers. They had the
yeah,
information at their hands, and it saved the company a lot of money comparatively, because they didn't have to have this big team working on this more complicated product. So VMware is one example. I
yeah,
think another example that I worked with when they first started, they came to us during the pandemic, is the Jostens. You might know them as I was thinking of school rings, class rings when I first met them, but they do a lot of other things related to schools and such. And again, a
yeah,
sales team, but they had a large change, obviously, in the pandemic,
yeah,
so that's what spurred it on, and we do hear from a lot of people that, change spurs on the desire for podcasts, or hearing from
yeah,
employees spurs that on, but not just the
yeah,
pandemic. But for them, they were able to, again, get information. Their team felt a lot more disconnected, because of the situation, and felt this tremendous anxiety about how they were going to do their jobs differently.
Yeah.
So it gave them the tools they needed, and also a lot of connection in that. So it became a really integral part of their L&D. And then what we find happens is, even though maybe that situation isn't there anymore, it still becomes a valuable tool for those employees moving forward. So that's another.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, when as an organization, you're investing so many resources into creating, whether it's white papers or, HR or learning development, it's something where, utilizing those assets is so important, right?
Yep.
And also valuable to your organization, right? Because you're
Yeah.
spending a lot of time and money to create, those numbers and content and strategy and analysis. Absolutely.
Yeah, and figuring out, I mean, in that case, they figured out a better, smarter, and less expensive way to do it, and that may not always be the case. Sometimes it may be spending some money, but making it more efficient. Sometimes it may be, there's all different scenarios, but you have to think about why, why you're
Yeah.
going to use it. And that makes sense. And then one other organization I'll mention, because they, again, have an interesting use case that comes to mind, is another longtime client of ours, Slalom, is a consulting company. And so they have people out and about, dealing
Yeah.
with clients on the road. And so they've also used it a lot in learning and development. A lot of theirs are employee stories, employee interviews. And so some of what we talked about earlier, I was thinking about them through that. But the cool thing is they've used it in some different ways. They really do a great job with doing these longer interviews and then editing them down to shorter pieces to be really digestible. And then they have then taken that and really implemented as part of onboarding. So people come in and really feel part of the organization from the start. And
Yeah.
now what's exciting is they're the one I kind of mentioned earlier. Actually, we have quite a few companies doing the same move now, but they're one of the ones that comes to mind, where they're now taking these internal podcasts that they've had for their employees and their new hires, and they're picking certain ones and getting the permissions and all of that, and kind of repackaging it to use it for recruiting and to show what it's like in the organization, because they have these amazing stories. And I mean, if we all listened, we'd probably all want to work there, because we'd see how, we'd see their words in action. Because, any organization can have a nice website and put a lot of words behind, oh, our organization really supports you and stuff. But you don't always believe it until you hear it from the employees. So they're going to really, I think it's going to be a great thing for them to use it in that new context too. So there's a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, a lot of really interesting applications of how podcasting is being used within organizations. I mean, it's really one of those things where when you look at operations and HR and management and how, companies are structured and communication occurs, podcasting has so many applications. It's just really mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think the other two things that I hear about more and more that I think will be interesting is different
Yeah.
ways of doing leadership development. Again, because you can get it out to more people,
Yeah.
and you can, to really have that accessibility to develop leaders because your leaders can come from all kinds of corners of the organization. So podcasts can really help with that, with giving people those tools and getting people engaged in where they want to move forward. And then also diversity and inclusion
Yes.
is something where we've also seen podcasts. I know I was part of a panel a while ago, and there was an organization. They specifically had an initiative, and when they had that initiative, they were trying to figure out what they wanted to do. And some of it was going to be, they were going to do some external things to support things in the community, but they were like, we don't want to just,
Yeah.
give money or go to a thing and then put our PR on it, and like, whoa, what do we want to do? And that they came up with this idea. And so in this, they do, again, a lot of stories from individuals within the organization, and a lot of projects around the initiative, and they use the podcast as a big part of that. So there's a lot of different ways I think that will evolve over time.
Yeah, and it really takes something like diversity and inclusion out of a performative space as well. So it really brings it into having a real impact within your organization, which is so important, because you want to make sure that everyone within your organization is included and represented. So it's definitely something where the application is really relevant. So I want to pivot a little bit and get a bit nerdy, Shannon, and
Sure.
talk about metrics a little bit. So with internal podcasting, the metrics are different. So first of all, I just want to speak a little bit about external podcasting, because
Mhm.
when you're looking at podcasting metrics for a public podcast, which is any public podcast you listen to on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you're a podcaster, you're not necessarily going to get the exact same numbers as you're going to get with internal. So let's dive in there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, overall, you'll see the similar stats,
Yeah.
but then we can see more. So the numbers that we usually talk about on podcasts are downloads, and the
Yes.
note I always make here, whether it's public or internal, is that a download isn't the same thing as as you seeing the file download. So in podcasting, when you think, oh, but those people are streaming instead, it actually shows as a download. It's a progressive download. So the point being, download numbers in podcasting includes people that actually download the file
Yeah.
and have it offline or stream it. So just to get that underway. So we have these general numbers, which are kind of broadly listening numbers, like this file something was done with this file to the
Right.
extent that we found it. So that's there. And for internal, external, you can see those kind of broad numbers. So
Yeah.
seeing
And
what
that's just how many people listened with our IAB stats, how many times the episode was listened to, but you're not getting real granular data.
Right. And so that that might be a useful metric to look at in terms of, we have 10,000 employees, we have 1,000 people listening. So we're getting X percentage. How does that compare with other things? So it's kind of useful in that realm. It's very similar to probably what you have for other content. If you put out a newsletter, you can kind of see how many people opened it and how many people clicked. So this is kind of comparative with that. And it is really important that you think about what you want in terms of those KPIs, and not comparing it necessarily to a public podcast or to getting 100% of people listening, but how it improves on past and other tools. But then with podcasting internally, we also have a more granular metrics. So we have the ability to show in an episode what the listening pattern is. So, okay, we had 100 listeners. Great. This episode was downloaded 100 times. But what if everyone only listens to 50% of it?
Right. Or the
That's
first
really
minute.
important to know. Right, exactly. That's very important to know. So this user engagement intelligence that we have shows this pattern. So you can see what people skip, what they repeat, how much the average engagement with the episode, which can then really shape what you do to improve it potentially moving forward, what issues there might be. If you see that, everyone dropped out after 10 minutes and we have a 30-minute episode, we either need to explore whether it needs to be shorter or whether the content got really boring or not useful at that point. Those things can help. And then depending on the situation with the data and the permissions, we can also have individual user level data given back. But again, that because this is a unique situation, so if the employer is enabled to see that because of data protection and stuff, then they can get it. Obviously, normally with podcasting, we couldn't provide that because it would go against data protection. This is a unique situation where people have permission with employees to see some
within
of this.
your organization, right?
And so they can actually, and some of our companies use our API integrations to actually feed that back into their system. So we talked about learning management systems earlier. We have, I know VMware is one, but I think there's several companies that I can think of where they'll actually get credits, for what they've listened to, what they've completed, and it basically drops the data back into their system every day, so that information is updated easily without them having to manually. They could get it manually in Podbean, but they have it set up as an integration. So,
absolutely. Nice. And I think with some of that individual user engagement intelligence, it's within your organization, you're as well. So maybe there's some concepts that are new within your organization or hard to grasp, right? It's something where they
and it can be an opportunity.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It
Yeah,
can
it
be
can
a
be a
real
real opportunity
opportunity.
to give them more information, or yeah, and to see if they need more, and also to just see that, wow, that content seems to be really helpful. I mean, maybe there's some
Yeah.
confusion there, but also really helpful. And they're L&D is getting so sophisticated. So with being able to track that data, they can really tie things into what they're offering. And again, with micro learning, they could have, you know, a notification goes then to that employee that says, hey, we also have this training series on this. We're going to have an
Yeah,
upcoming in-person training on this if you want to get more into depth, if you need more, and can provide
absolutely.
all of that. So it can be quite sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where seeing what the impact is within your organization, you can really track that back to the
Mhm.
individual data. And also, it could help even on an individual level of, you know, knowing where to expand your library of content
Right. Right.
as well.
Definitely.
It can really help drive that content and, drive where in your organization, I want to say like the holes are, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, what
absolutely.
information people is really resonating with people that they apparently
Mhm.
need and they need more of, so it can really drive the content moving forward. And small decisions about things like length and,
Yeah,
different, elements that we put into the podcast that maybe, wow, everybody loves that part, they're repeating, so we can make improvements. So it makes it very easy to improve and grow the program by taking a look at that. And I think that more granular level is where the beauty of that really is.
yeah,
And then when it comes to the overall numbers, too, with podcasts, I think again it's really important we do get asked, oh, what's a good benchmark? If we have 10,000 employees, what should we expect? Should 9,000 people listen? What's success? And I hate these it depends answers, but I always give them because
yeah,
I've had organizations where out of 10,000, if 1,000 listened, that's a tremendous success because no one was reading their newsletter, or
yeah,
employees were very frustrated with the time consumption of certain training. So those 1,000 were the ones that were really demanding it. And now they're very satisfied, and you're going to keep those employees and you're going to keep them on track. So that's a success. For another organization, that number may not look great. So it's really very relative. And I think you recently interviewed a university that's one of our clients, Lehigh University, and they talked
yes,
about their numbers are small in terms of listeners, or seem small in terms of listeners, but the size of the university is much smaller than some of the others that were talking about their numbers with the person. And they realized, oh, yeah, actually, we have to compare those things. It's not a hard number. It's not, 200
yes,
isn't bad
exactly.
when you're tiny. So those things are key to look at in terms of the overall stats too.
Yes, exactly, exactly, Shannon. And I think it's, each organization is going to set the benchmark for what success looks like, when we're looking at KPIs, when we're looking at what impact you'd like to make within your organization with any kind of learning and development, HR initiative, training, really communications within your organization, it's really custom, right? It's really a unique situation for each company. And so it's something where, when you have those metrics in front of you and you can really see things grow, you don't necessarily maybe know what the impact is going to be going in. Or it's something where, maybe there is a segment of your employee population that is so underserved. Like some people within organizations just get really bad screen fatigue, right? So that percentage of people, whatever percentage it is, they are going to really appreciate that podcast, right? They're going to really appreciate that content. They're going to really appreciate those online training programs for podcasts, right? They're going to really appreciate being able to brush up on their sales strategy on the way to
Yeah.
to a sales call, right? Or to a meeting. And so it's something where knowing how people learn differently
Mhm.
and being able to serve the needs of those people within your organization is huge. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it all comes down to thinking about initially why you're doing the podcast, and then so not thinking of a why, and then all of a sudden trying to measure something
Yeah.
different, if you had that specific why. And then, as you mentioned, the other thing is because podcasts allow you to be very nimble, it can change. So if you're finding something's really successful and something else isn't, it's very easy when you have, especially once you've already set up Podbean as a platform and you've set up the podcasting kind of concept within your organization, it's very easy for other departments to start doing podcasts, to get new podcasts going, also to say, this isn't working or it needs to be changed, and you haven't spent millions of dollars on creating this full program. And it's also why we tell people, you might create a series in advance, and you might want to plan, you certainly want to plan ahead so that you're not scrambling at the last minute, but you don't need to sit down and make all the podcasts you're ever going to make today so that you can change and develop over time.
Okay. Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. I think we lost you for a second. Anything can happen with live. Sorry, please continue.
Oh, no worries. You froze for a second there. But I think that is, one of the beauties of podcasting is that it can develop as it needs to and can change. So every client we've had for a long time that's working with podcasts and leadership and learning and development has made changes over time. And a lot of that has been going into new podcasts, adding things as they need to, rethinking, re-strategizing, all of that. So it's very easy to do that. And our platform makes it easy to really manage all that and let different people be involved, which is another thing with accessibility, is having different people contribute and different departments be able to use podcasting is cool, because again, everything doesn't need to come always from leadership, and everything also doesn't need to come from necessarily oriented from the learning and development department, or from this. Again, there might be individual departments that can contribute in a lot of ways. So that's what makes it cool.
No, absolutely. And I think it's something where when we're looking at, because we're podcast nerds here at Podbean, right? Sometimes I just have to, remind everybody we're big podcast nerds here. But it's something where, at Podbean, we really love seeing that seed of a moment of, hey, this additional department within our organization would really benefit from having a podcast, and then watching it grow, and then hearing from the client how it's expanding and how the experience and impact within the organization, takes off. It's so exciting. And what we also say is, podcasting is so exciting that everybody really wants to get on board. So
Yeah, definitely. And we're glad we have a lot of resources, and we're glad to share if anyone ever wants to contact us and reach out, if they're saying, yeah, but how do we do that? And what do we need? We sometimes get questions about, we consider relatively simple things about equipment and stuff, but it really is easy to let that grow and make it, this does not have to be super complicated. And a lot of times you have the stuff, this kind of stuff, already within your organization. And especially if you're producing good, useful content, sometimes the audio piece doesn't need to be as complicated as people might think. So there really don't need to be a lot of barriers. There's all different ways you can do it. So, and we're here to be a resource for that. So whether you're using Podbean now, thinking about it, or not even thinking about using us, which I hope you would be, but even if you're not, we have a LinkedIn group where people can share information, and we are glad to share different resources to hopefully get you going and make it easy.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll have all those links in the description of our live stream here today. It's something also where if you ever want to know more, you can just go to podbean.com/enterprise. And if you ever have questions directly for us at the team here for our Corporate Podcasting Smarter and Podcasting Smarter series here with resources, best practices, and tools, please reach out to us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com, which I'll also have here in the description. So if you ever have any questions, we are here for you. So Shannon, just to kind of wrap up, we've talked pretty much about the entire process of podcasting through an organization, from the idea to that manifestation of having podcasting integrated into learning, development, training. And within a lot of the organizations that we've seen, we've talked a little bit about the impact that podcasting has had with some organizations that we've worked with. But overall, can you just kind of break down, like, the top 3 or 5 bullet points, maybe, of, we talked about stories, how you remember things, but let's do bullet points of those impacts that we've seen within organizations and the real world results that a lot of these organizations have had.
Yeah, I think that probably the number one has been the accessibility of information that people need on demand, at their fingertips.
Yeah.
So whether it is the micro learning we talked about or the onboarding has been a big one that we've heard of a lot of results with, that they've seen a significant difference. And it's a bit qualitative, not quantitative, because
Yeah.
it's them hearing from the people that did it. I know one of the
Yeah.
organizations, they do a little quiz afterwards. They don't make it punishing, they make it rewarding. They do get little fun prizes, but it's a way to
Yeah.
test that how the information really gets across. And so they have that quantitative data that shows people are getting the information, but also qualitatively they're hearing from those employees that they feel very differently than they have when they joined other organizations because of having those podcasts. So that and other examples, I think is quite often what we hear from people. And then I guess number two is probably the ability to be flexible with with employees, work
Yeah.
situations, environment on the go, that kind of stuff. So the flexibility, I mean, I guess that's kind of accessibility too. And then the other piece that I often talk about relates to that storytelling is that the
Yeah.
medium of podcasting itself. So not the ease of deliverability and the ease of access,
Yeah.
but the actual power of the voice and the stories and what you can do with that. And that's where, again, it comes down a lot to creating the content. And again, we have resources and ideas if people need it. But a lot of these teams of L&D teams that's their skill set. So it's a natural thing for them to take the skill set they have about
Yeah.
creating trainings and storytelling and putting it into podcasting, but being able to be nimble with it and being able to repurpose things and all of that. And then I'd say another piece that's really great about podcasting and where people are seeing the results is that ability to easily be flexible and manage and to analyze the
Yeah.
data. I think
Yeah.
compared to some other kinds of content, the data is a bit better in terms of what you can get, certainly versus things that are reading, so that data can be really helpful in improving and changing, but just being able to do at the moment, the VMware example podcast when the pandemic hit and they needed this kind of resource. I think that there wasn't really a better option than podcasting there for them to be able to meet that need. So, it's got a lot of flexibility, and we're just seeing so many different uses. So if you think of
Yeah.
something that might be an idea about podcasting, or even, sometimes I'll have people say to me, no, we haven't done anything with podcasting. It doesn't really fit our organization. But as we talk more about what they're working on and their
Yeah.
employee situation, I always think like, oh yeah, there's actually it doesn't do everything, doesn't fit every need, but a lot of times there are, as you
Yeah.
said, holes that could be filled, that it
Yeah.
could really help.
Or gaps. Yeah. Gaps in
Yeah.
learning.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Within an organization. Well, thank you, Shannon Martin, our Director of Communications here at Podbean, for joining me here today. This has been such a rich conversation. And for everyone out here who's joined us today, whether you've joined us live or in the replay, we'll have all of the links here in the description. I want to say show notes because
Yeah.
this episode is also going to be on our Corporate Podcasting Smarter podcast as well. But we'll have all of those links here to our Podbean LinkedIn group, which is really helpful as well. Our LinkedIn, our enterprise site where you can learn all about Podbean's corporate podcasting and read a lot of those case studies have really proven the value of podcasting within so many different organizations. Well, once again, my name is Norma Jean Belenke. I'm the head of events here at Podbean, and I'm joined today by Shannon Martin, our Director of Communications and Corporate Podcast Specialist. This is Corporate Podcasting Smarter, and we are brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetization company. We host over 600,000 public podcasts, and we have an incredible internal podcasting platform and product. So If you have any questions, please send us an email or get in touch. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.